One single item. Pickup shrank an entire organ system and made the brain 50% bigger in one patch cycle. That's not a balance change, that's a build-defining exploit, and every human alive today is still running on it. Right now, your brain is eating roughly 20% of your entire resting energy budget, just sitting there, doing nothing dramatic, just existing. For a comparison, that organ makes up about 2% of your total body mass. That's an absurdly inefficient ratio for any build to run. And if you tried to pull this off on the old raw food meta, you'd have needed 9, 10, 11 hours a day just chewing to afford it. A gorilla build eating raw plant matter already spends about 9 hours a day feeding just to hit its normal stat requirements. Scale that up to cover a human-sized brain tax, and you're looking at 2 extra hours of non-stop chewing on top of that, every single day, forever. No build has that kind of playtime to spare. And yet, here you are, brain fully funded, without spending half your life with your jaw, locked in the eat animation. This isn't a fan theory. This comes from the cooking hypothesis, most thoroughly laid out by Harvard biological anthropologist Richard Wrangham in his research and his book, Catching Fire, plus fossil data showing gut size, shrinking, and brain size expanding at the exact same evolutionary checkpoint. The receipts are in the bones. Claim 1. Cooking is the most broken efficiency exploit any build has ever discovered. Raw food takes serious in-game resources to process, long chew times, long digestion times, low energy yield per bite. Cooking is essentially a free pre-processing step that happens outside the body instead of inside it. Heat breaks down tough fibers and proteins before they ever hit your mouth, so your system spends way less energy extracting the same or more usable calories. Controlled studies feeding animals cooked versus raw versions of the same food found the cooked food group consistently gained more mass and banked more usable energy. Same intake, same activity level. That's not a small buff. That's a core stat multiplier applied to every single meal, forever. Takeaway. Cooking didn't just make food taste better, it quietly rewrote the entire resource management side of the human build. Claim 2. And this is where the trade-off gets interesting. The extra energy had to go somewhere, and the build chose brain power over jaw power. Around 1.8 million years ago, the fossil record shows Homo erectus showing up with jaws, teeth, and guts noticeably smaller than its predecessor Homo habilis, paired with a brain about 50% larger. That's a full stat respec. Big investment into a high-cost, high-upside stat, funded by pulling points out of raw digestive horsepower the build's no longer needed as badly. This is a genuinely rare kind of trade in evolutionary history. Most builds only add capability. They don't actively shrink one system to fund another. Takeaway. Fire didn't just add a new tool to the loadout. It let the entire species respect its stat allocation, and that respec is the reason you're capable of reading complex ideas about respecting right now. Claim 3, and here's a pattern interrupt worth flagging honestly. Not everyone agrees this patch note is fully accurate. Some researchers have pushed back hard, running mathematical models suggesting brain growth scaled in a straight line, independent of confirmed fire use, and mouse experiments where cooked meat didn't actually deliver more usable calories than raw. In other words, some analysts think cooking gets too much credit in the patch notes, and other factors, like an increased meat diet in general, may be doing more of the heavy lifting than fire alone. Fair criticism, but even the skeptics aren't arguing fire did nothing. They're arguing about how much of the credit it deserves, not whether it mattered. Takeaway, even a genuinely OP mechanic in evolutionary history still gets contested in the patch notes, and that's honestly a good sign the field is doing its job properly instead of just repeating a cool story. Claim 4, fire's buffs weren't limited to digestion, it triggered a full kit overhaul. Beyond freeing up hours previously spent chewing, cooking is believed to have shortened weaning time for infants, since babies could access softer, energy-dense cooked food earlier instead of relying entirely on nursing. Shorter weaning windows meant mothers could support more offspring over a lifetime, a direct upgrade to the species' overall respawn rate. On top of that, freed up daylight hours that used to go straight into chewing could now be spent hunting, socializing, or building tools, redirecting huge amounts of playtime from pure maintenance into actual build progression. Takeaway, this wasn't a single stat buff. Fire touched digestion, parenting, social structure, and tool development practically simultaneously, which is the exact definition of a mechanic that breaks the balance of an entire game rather than just one match. So here's the full patch summary. 1 mechanic, control of fire, delivered a caloric efficiency multiplier, funded a full brain for jaw stat respec, shortened the reproduction cooldown timer, and freed enough playtime to unlock social and technological progression paths that were previously locked behind an attendance wall of pure chewing. Almost nothing in the natural world gets a buff this comprehensive without a nerf showing up somewhere to balance it out. Humans just never got that nerf. The buff stuck permanently and every advantage stacked on top of every other advantage until the build separated itself completely from everything else on the server. Remember that number from the start of this video? 20% of your energy budget, funding an organ that's 2% of your mass. That ratio only exists because one ancestor at some point controlled a source of heat well enough to cook with it and never let go of the advantage again. If you want the next deep dive, breaking down exactly how the gossip mechanic let humans scale social cooperation past what any grooming-based build could ever support, subscribe because that patch note is coming up next. Thank you for watching, and as always, good luck out there.